الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat show. Now, very often we hear the scholars remind us, and even in our own interaction, even if you're not a scholar, but every Muslim knows that this ummah is an ummah of balance. It is an ummah of moderation. The verse of the Quran is very famous and it is often repeated and often quoted. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, where Allah says, I have made you an ummah of balance. I have made you an ummah of moderation. And in everything, we are balanced. And in everything, we ought to be moderate. If we look at our belief, we are balanced. We are moderate. On the one hand, you have those who don't believe in any greater being. On the other hand, you have those who believe in Allah, but they ascribe partners to Allah. And Islam is balanced. It's right in the middle. You believe in Allah, but exclusively in the oneness of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, Tawheed. Even in ibadah and worship, there is balance, there is moderation. We don't say that you become a hermit or that you become a monk and you dedicate your entire life only to acts of devotion and worship. Worship has its place, but you also have to have a social life. You earn a living. You have interaction with your spouse and your family. You get married. So in every aspect, there's moderation, there's balance. In the way you go about doing things, in your passions, in your leanings. So you may have love for your child or you may have love for your spouse, but there has to be balance in that. It should not detract you from other priorities and from other obligations and from other commitments that you have in your life. And if you study the Quran, every teaching is meticulously balanced. If you look at the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the sunnah, the seerah, the teachings, the instructions, the prohibitions, the advocations, everything is perfectly balanced. It's a lifestyle that is moderate. It's a lifestyle that does not incline to any one of the two extremes. But mankind, in our weakness, in our haste, in our desire, in our passion, we tend to sometimes lean a little to the right or a little to the left, or too much to the right, or too much to the left, and we commit excess. And that's where the word addiction comes in. So some people become addicted to food. Some people become addicted to their careers. Some people become addicted to things which are impermissible from the get-go, like alcohol or drugs. So there are various forms of addiction. Sometimes an act can be good in itself. It can be permissible in itself. But then you overdo it and you become addicted to it. And that is a sign of excess. It's a sign of overdoing it, and sometimes we underdo it. But more so, we overdo it. Because we have our passions, we have our desires, we have our inclinations. And sometimes we lose that sense of priority. And sometimes we lose that sense of balance. And that is the purpose behind today's discussion. We are talking about sport addiction. Now let's be honest, in a formal way, we don't talk about it all that often. In an informal way, we're always talking about it. Wives are complaining about their husbands being addicted to some sort of sport or the other, too much of golf or too much of fishing or too much of this, or spectator sport that, now the husband is just every weekend or whatever, just sitting there like a couch potato, watching one match after the other or catching up. So it's spoken about many times humorously, many times, in a kind of teasing way, but it's becoming a serious issue. It's affecting a person's balance in their own life. It affects their marriages. It affects their family life. It affects their sleep patterns and routines. It has its consequences. It's a bit of a touchy subject. Sometimes people become a little sensitive, maybe overly so, that we need a bit of leisure in life. We need a bit of relaxation in life. Why must we make an issue of everything? I don't think this is about making an issue of everything. It's about addiction. It's about understanding our priorities in life and understanding where the balance lies. So we talk about sport addiction on the program this evening. Our guest in studio is now a well-known face and voice to the viewers of ITV, and that is none other than Moulana Ahmad Aku. You may have seen Moulana during the month of Ramadan doing the feature Riyadus Salihin, and that feature continues now on the airwaves of ITV after Ramadan. So regularly throughout the week, you will see those slots where Moulana unpacks and he elaborates on the meanings of the hadith that have been enlisted in that famous work of hadith, Riyadus Salihin, by Imam Nawawi rahimahullah. But today we're talking sport addiction. Moulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, Moulana.
Growing up, did you have any inclination towards a particular sport? Were you kind of fanatical, soccer, cricket, anything of that sort?
Well, I don't think there's anybody that can say that they never had that when they were young. It's a motion that we've all been through at some point or the other, and I've
So
had
what was
my fair
yours?
share. Mine was cricket.
It was cricket.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
never so much for the
Bowler,
soccer team.
batsman,
No, never playing, always spectating.
spectating. Okay. You know, that aspect that I mentioned in my introduction, I don't know if you want to add on to that. The whole tone for this discussion it goes back to that aspect of moderation, balance.
Drawing the balance, I think you unpacked it perfectly in that introduction. It's because it's about maintaining the balance, and as you correctly mentioned, it could be a very touchy subject to some. Sports is something that people generally hold very dear to their hearts. So I think it's more about maintaining the balance, which is the most important thing. And like that, it would go for any other aspect in our life. It's about keeping the balance.
I suppose there are many wives out there at the moment somehow trying to coax their husbands that this is a program that you must watch.
It could be also vice versa, Moulana, because I won't say that sports is something that's entirely confined to our men folk. I mean, there could be a lot of our sisters out there that may be suffering from the same problem. Maybe the husband is saying, wife, you need to watch it as
Possibly,
well.
but I suppose primarily it's a male thing.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so let's try and understand it, because one is, to highlight where the excesses are and to highlight, where we're overstepping. But let's try and understand why we tend to overstep. Why is sports so enjoyable? And I think we need to mention to the viewers up front that one is spectator sport, and we'll be talking about that as well. And the other is physical sport, which is not problematic per se, but when you overindulge, it can become problematic. Why do people find it so attractive, so enjoyable, that they end up overdoing it?
I think from the onset, what we need to understand is, as human beings and the way we are created and the certain inclinations that we naturally have, everybody likes to play. It stems from our childhood, from young children. It's all about fun and games. And I think that's something that carries over as we grow up in life and as we mature and now we become adults. So what makes sports so enjoyable is firstly the fun and the interaction that we get with other people as well. For some people, it's a sense of mental well-being that they get from the sport itself. There's something that we get in from it that makes it so enjoyable. And what we would be getting from sports itself, the sport that we indulge in, is something that we will not get in other facets of life. It's something different that we get in that makes it enjoyable. It's the fun part, it's the playing part. It's a whole list of things that are put together in this aspect.
I suppose also the element of competition. So, for example, those who take their physical sports a bit more seriously and they play every week and they have a kind of local league and that kind of thing, it's about a little bit about rivalry and even spectator sport. You know, the old Manchester United versus Liverpool, and you got your loyalty towards one particular team. And even though you're not physically participating, but there's a sense of competitiveness that, whose team will prevail over whose.
The competitiveness definitely plays a big role, but there again, that also becomes a bit of a worrying factor in terms of to what level will you take the competition to. But competitiveness, yes, it does also bring out the best in us as well. So to a certain extent, as we said, we're drawing the balance. There's that level of benefit that you get in from it, because when you compete in, obviously you want to give off your best. When you play in it yourself, I don't know, it doesn't go so much from the spectating part, but competitiveness is definitely something that is looked at in this aspect.
It's amazing, isn't it, that element of competitiveness in us, even if we digress for a moment, because sometimes even if a father is just knocking a ball around in the backyard with his kids, he doesn't want to lose. Even
No,
if he has to cheat a
definitely
bit.
No, we all play with our kids and we all face that at some point or the other. Yes, definitely, because you want to be the best. I mean, again, the competitive nature is something which is part of the spirit of man, and that's not something that's only confined to sports itself. Again, that's in every aspect of our life, that aspect of us wanting to come out on tops. And actually, that's another problem that the world is facing, if we can put it that way, because when it goes to an extreme level, it does become problematic.
Indeed it does. All right, time for us to take a break. We've set the scene. When we come back, we get right into the meat of the discussion, inshallah. Welcome back. So, the topic for discussion this evening is sport addiction. And before the break, our guest in studio, Mohammed Akku, set the scene for us. We spoke about moderation. We spoke about why people tend to overdo it a little bit when it comes to sport, be it physical sports where you involve yourself directly, or whether it's spectator sport. Now, we get into the core of it. And I think sometimes we hear this term, sports fanatic. Or, he's fanatical about soccer, he's fanatical about cricket, or whatever else it is, either following or himself involved in. in many ways, this is a key question, as difficult as it is to draw a line. But where is that line, or where is that line supposed to be? When do we say that now you're becoming fanatical, now you're really overdoing it? How do you ascertain that?
You know, Moulana, in the build up to this program, I was doing a little bit of research on the topic itself, and there's a lot of write-ups out there with regards to sports and extremism in sports, etc. Surprisingly, by what we would term as the Western world, and what they have picked up in terms of their research. And one of the articles that I read that highlights what defines a sports fanatic is rather surprising, because when we go through it, it's 3 simple points. But if we really look at it, sometimes we would be wondering whether we're speaking about ourselves, because it's something that is very commonly found in the world. And they say that if you're a person that cancels all your plans to play the sport, number 1, or to watch your team playing, that's the first telltale sign. Number 2, if you're the type of person whose mood swings are altered by the fortune or misfortune of your team or of the sport that you're playing. And number 3, if you're the type of person who would never be caught dead in the rival team's jersey or supporting the rival team, then you're defined as a sports fanatic. If we just take those 3 simple points and try and unpack and digest that, that's something that is genuine, that so many people are actually going through in terms of themselves. Now, if we go back to our introduction and this topic of sports itself, what is the purpose of a game? At the end of the day, it's just a game. That's something that is embedded in our minds, and we thought from the time we're young that after all, it's just a game. So any person who's playing the sport, or a person who's a spectator, for example, I don't know whether we should do both side by side. That makes more sense to draw the balance between the two. If you enjoy the sport, playing the sport, and you know it's just a game, you're not a fanatic. Because it's not about winning or losing, it's about enjoying the game. And secondly, if you're a spectator as well, if you're really that patriotic of your team, supporting your team, whoever your team is, whether they deserve to win or they don't deserve to win, that's a separate issue. But if you're enjoying it for that moment that you're enjoying it, and you're deriving some sort of relaxation and benefit, well and good. But if it's going to the level of what we just spoke about, where it consumes you entirely, then you're defined as a sports fanatic, and that is something that is really problematic in different aspects of our life, from a spiritual level, from our lives in this world, etc.
No, I think, Moulana, you've touched on a few key areas there in terms of what is the definition of a fanatic. And the idea for us here, on a serious note now, is not to judge the next person. It's to each one of us needs to look at ourselves and say, okay, am I overdoing it in terms of these key areas? I mean, the one is, as you say, you lose sense of your priorities. I mean, if you start to miss your salah, or that which is priority apart from ibadah, but in terms of your family or in terms of your work, if it's impeding on that, then it means now that you're becoming fanatical. The other is also when you become too absorbed, that element of fun now is beyond that. Now, we all know in our families, to some extent there'll be a bit of teasing. You're a United fan, I'm a Liverpool fan, the game went on and the one lost and the one won. There'll be a bit of light-hearted banter. But sometimes you see it in some families, it gets very serious. Sometimes even social occasions can become spoiled because the debate becomes too robust and it goes out of control, and each one arguing for their team almost as if their life depended on it.
No, definitely. It becomes a very serious situation. I mean, we get so affected by something that is so far away from us, number one, right? We get so affected by something that really does not have much to do with us as believers. Let's draw the genuine balance. And something that's not going to impede in any way on our year after. It's not going to hamper us in any way. It definitely does not make any difference to our lives, in particular, us as individuals, whether they won or whether they lost, or whether somebody else's team won and we lost. It should not be making such a difference to us, but it becomes such a serious issue. People fight about it and they take it as a sense of honor and pride. This is my team, you don't say anything, it's my players, more on a light-hearted, on the light side of things. When you hear people talk about sport, it's so passionate. We paid so much for this guy. This guy was worth the money, but I mean, you never paid money. You never paid anything as well. We let this guy go, and we take it so personally, as if like we're really into the whole thing, and that definitely renders us, unfortunately, as being the fanatical part.
You're so right, because they hardly do you hear people comment these days. I mean, the World Cup has just passed, right? And I don't have the time. And when I was a bit younger, I had more of a passion to follow these things. But hardly will you hear a person say, that was a good game of ball, irrespective who won or who lost. it's each party trying to make frivolous arguments in defense of their team. No, they lost because of the referee, or the coach tactics was wrong, or that player messed up. And then you tend to think, but what exactly is the point here? It's no longer, just that element of enjoyment if it's spectator sport for a while. Nor is it even when it comes to the physical sports, people become physical. Where they want to fight now over the results, where fathers are rolling up their sleeves on the sidelines when their kids, who are playing a particular sport, and then you sit back and you say, but these are supposed to be adult people, intelligent people, educated people, and over a game of soccer where your kid is playing, or over a game of soccer where you're playing, fists are starting to fly, and vulgarity is all over the show, and that becomes hugely problematic.
It becomes a big problem. And then when we look at it on a broader scale of what really happens across the world when one team loses and the team that you think is going to win, suddenly things turn upside down. And then we see the fights that break out in the stadiums itself, and the things are broken and people are injured and all those type of things. And then what happens to that poor team when they go back home? Everybody's throwing dirt in their face, etc. You see, again, we lose the entire essence of a game being a game. What we need to all understand is when two teams are playing, they cannot both win. Any person enters as a sport where two teams go against each other, somebody has to lose. It's a natural thing. But then again, from the onset and from the origins of sport itself, it was all about the game itself. It was not only about winning. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that the world is facing at present with regards to success and failure. What determines success and what determines failure? I mean, if we look at it, just to digress a little, at the schooling curriculum or even life itself, it's either you first or you were last. It's either you passed or you failed. So that indoctrination of our minds is something which is really pouring over into different aspects of our life and really causing problems. The same thing comes with sport. What's supposed to be an enjoyable relaxation, unwinding, or enjoying a game happening in front of you and appreciating the sport itself, that's totally lost. It's only about winning. And the moment you're not on the winning side, then suddenly there's all these negative emotions that come about.
Now, another important point that you touched on, and I just want to unpack it a little bit further, is that aspect of fluctuation of emotions. Maybe to some extent it's found where you yourself are playing in a particular game and now you're feeling despondent for 2-3 days because you lost. But I think to a greater extent it's seen in spectator sport. Your guy doesn't make it at Wimbledon, or your team doesn't make it at the World Cup. I don't know if you remember, Moulana, but back in 1999 when South Africa got knocked out in the semi-final of that Cricket World Cup, they never really lost, right? It was a tie, and they needed 4 balls to make 1 run, and that infamous run out, and people were literally in tears. In some homes, you would think that they just got a news that somebody close to them had passed away. And I remember, I think this game was played on a Thursday. And the next day, I went for Jummah, and I was still a student that time, and I heard the Imam, I can't remember who he was, he said, you know what, brothers, it's all about perspective. Don't take it so personally. Rather think of whether you'll be short of 1 deed on the day of Qiyamah than whether they were short of 1 run and now they didn't make it for the World Cup. But that fluctuation of emotion can become rather severe for those people who are too passionate about following a particular team.
Touching a soft chord, Yama. They were almost there. I'm literally replaying that in my mind as we speak. But exactly correct, as you said. It becomes so emotional and it consumes you. I mean, you're depressed. What difference did it make to your life? As I said earlier, it made absolutely no difference to you. And really, we need to be concentrating on that which is more important. Now, again, we also need to understand that our emotions, both our happiness and both our joy, what should it be based on as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Your emotion, your happiness, your sadness, all that also it needs to be governed or curtailed to a certain extent. We're supposed to be happy at that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you want to be sad, then you should also be sad for a noble reason. Sometimes we go through the challenges of life, you understand the cause of a person's sadness, the cause of a person's depression. It's because of a real tragedy or a test that has come upon us. Now, are you going to say you tested by the Almighty because the team lost? No, that's not a test. That test has no benefit. Or that negative emotion now, or that sadness and that depression. Remember, as believers in Allah, when we're happy and we're grateful to Allah, we've been rewarded. And if we are sad and we're depressed because of a challenge that comes upon us and we're making sabr or be patient, we're getting rewarded for it. It becomes a noble cause. Here you're letting off so much of negative emotion for a lost cause. You're getting absolutely nothing. Firstly, the people that you are crying over, or the team, they don't even know that you exist. Let's really keep that as a reality. They have no idea that we exist. Many a times we say, they're playing for us, they're not playing for us. It's
play
also
for
about,
themselves, yeah.
no, it's a price tag. It's the price tag. I mean, we've seen that in very recent times, right? It all depends where, and sometimes they're playing for themselves, and then they say they're playing for their country, whatever that might be. But they have no idea that we exist. You lend in so much of emotion to a team or to an individual that does not know that you exist and doesn't care whether you exist or not. We need to be a little bit more wiser and more mature, I think.
Yeah, now that we spoke about the 99 semi-final, it brings back some memories. My late father, he was one of those who after 94, he never supported the South African team because he saw them as very racist. And us being much younger, we were supporting the South African team. And I can remember when Lance Klusener scored that hit that 4 in the beginning of that last over and the scores were tied. So I looked at my dad and I said that we can't lose. Because that's what we all thought at the time,
exactly.
right? We can't lose. And he didn't say nothing because he also assumed the same thing. No one knew at that time that if it was a draw, you're going to get knocked out because of what happened previously. And when they got knocked out, we never heard the end of it. But it was a kind of gentle teasing. It was not about, that your life depended on it. And now because something happened, I think, and you say it so aptly, those people are playing in it. They're playing for their own careers, for their own profile, for their own money. They're not even loyal to that team. They get sold, from one team to another team. And they move on. It's got nothing really to do with you, and yet you take it too personally. It doesn't make sense, even on a logical level.
No, definitely. And I think it's after that the C word came into play with reference to the South African team itself.
Yeah. All right. On that note, let's take a break. Inshallah, when we come back, we continue the discussion on sports addiction.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك.
Welcome back. So we're talking about sports addiction, and our guest in studio this evening, Moulana Ahmed Aku. And prior to the break, we spoke about how would you determine whether you're becoming fanatical or not. And Moulana outlined a few key points there. And we also started to speak about the harms of indulging or overindulging when it comes to either physical participation in sport and especially following different sports or spectator sport as it's called. Now, as part of the harms, Moulana, one that we need to look at independently and we need to focus on intensely is the impact on family life. Now, I mentioned earlier on, sometimes there will be this light-hearted banter and a bit of teasing between husband and wife. You and your soccer, you and your sports. Ladies may be following some sports, so for them it may be more their soapies. I don't know, these days MasterChef, that's becoming a big addiction for the ladies. But in the end of the day, without realizing, maybe gradually, it kind of sucks you into such an extent that it can have severe implications on your marriage. You can start neglecting your children. You can become very reclusive and very moody based on what's happening, to your team with significant consequences for your family life.
Definitely, Moulana, and especially in the world that we're living in at present, where we're facing, for example, the great challenge of social media and screen addiction with our cell phones, etc. That is already hampering our progress in terms of us bonding as families. It's already becoming a major issue in many people's lives, but for some people it's not really a major issue because everybody is comfortable with their own phone, so everybody is happy. Actually, it'll be more of a problem nowadays if that phone is taken away and when there's load shedding and the Wi-Fi is cut off, everybody becomes uncomfortable. So we seem to have become accustomed and comfortable now with everybody being in their own social media space and in their own web, but it has already affected the family unity itself. Now when we're looking at this aspect of sports addiction and overindulgence in it, and if we look at the World Cup that has just passed by us, for example, and when a person is obsessed with their sports or with their team or even playing themselves, this does hamper and affect a family life to quite an extent, and it becomes a distraction for us, and it creates a negative vibe and a negative impact on between husband and wife, between your interaction with your kids, and on a broader level of families itself. Definitely it does cause a big problem.
We have been talking about both, and I think, but perhaps, we've given quite a few examples with regards to spectator sport, but even physical sports. You hear many times complaints coming from spouses, every weekend is golf, or every weekend is fishing. I don't know if you can count fishing as a sport, or those who play locally amongst their colleagues, but on a fairly regular basis. And it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem in the marriage. It becomes a problem in terms of your priorities, because on that particular day, on that particular weekend, and many times these things tend to happen over the weekend for obvious reasons, but that is also coinciding now with family activity, with functions. I've heard of instances where people will skip weddings and walimas of close family members because, hey, we arranged this fishing trip or it's golf weekend, and they really get sucked into it.
I don't know whether you should look at it also on a positive note. We're supposed to be calculated and very, very punctual as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like for example, your salah is at a specified time, nothing can come in between you and your salah, but that's with regards to your worship.
Yeah.
Now, if that's our mindset now that we employ in everywhere, okay, we need to touch on it very delicately. But again, it's also about drawing the balance. We cannot be in such a situation that we're depriving those closest to us of their rights because of a trivial pleasure that we are indulging in. And I think to be more proactive and to be more productive in terms of trying to help the situation, then we really need to be going the extra mile on another front to make up for your obsession that you have. So if a person, for example, has a habit or has their routine set out that this day is booked for golf or this day is booked for whatever, then you got to make sure you're giving extra time to make up for that. That's something that we definitely need to look at, because we can't be so focused on everything else and Monday to Friday we're working and then we don't have time for our family, and the excuse is because we are at work and we have our commitments. Here comes the weekend that it's supposed to be family time, and suddenly now you have another commitment. We have to be drawing the balance. So if we can look at practical measures that we can implement to help the situation, you don't have to be playing every week. It's not a do or die thing. Alternate weeks, make some sort of adjustment. Compromise. Compromise is something that in a marriage is what saves a marriage, for example. And it's supposed to be part of our life all the time. Compromising in some way or the other, or making sure you're making up for where you're falling short. That should be more practical measures that we need to be looking at. But then we need to tell our sisters out there also, I don't know whether we should say this more on a lighter note, that maybe we should ask the question, why does he want to be out of the home all the time? Make the home a little more exciting. Maybe, look, we're talking about sport, Moulana, and as I said, in doing research with this topic itself, and we look at the sunnah of the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, very beautifully you mentioned in the introduction about the perfect balance that our beautiful deen has brought about to every facet of life. So Islam is not the religion or the deen that would promote or propagate that there's no such thing as fun, there's no such thing as games, etc. When we look at it from the perspective of the Sunnah, there are specific sports that have been mentioned or activities that have been mentioned that we should be indulging in that are extremely beneficial to us physically, spiritually, etc. And among those sports or those means of entertainment that the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned is a wife a husband playing with their wife, indulging in some sort of activity with your spouse itself. So I don't know whether you're going to be taking the wife for golf with you or whether she'll make it the grade, etc. I'm not sure how we're going to look at that.
How many of us will win the race, man?
No, look at the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ raced with our beloved mother Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, obviously in seclusion and in an environment that was conducive to it, which we also need to keep into perspective and focus on that as well. But we need to be having entertainment together as a family, or leisure, if we can put it that way.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what you mentioned about balance and moderation, because sometimes men become defensive. They say, oh, you know what, but I'm keeping fit, I'm doing this for physical reasons. And
no, sometimes the excuse will be offered, at least I'm doing something wrong, you want me to be doing something wrong?
As long as, at least I'm not going to the club, I'm not going to womanize or anything. I'm just going to have some fun with my friends, and we're playing soccer, we're going for fishing. But there's ample example when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cautioned Sahaba, even when it came to worship, that don't do it. Don't overdo it, rather. وَإِنَّ لِزَوْجِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, that your wife has a right and your body has a right. So even though there are benefits, nobody doubts that, if you're going and you're playing golf, you're walking quite a bit, there's a physical benefit, there's a mental benefit, it's refreshing and all of that. But it has to be balanced, and it has to be, you have to understand what are your priorities and keep it at that level of priority. And that's the secret to it.
Definitely.
All right, now, Moulana, also the aspect of becoming antisocial. The kind of classical example, just as the game is reaching that fever point, the doorbell rings. And nowadays in the more mobile environment, people are at a particular function, but everyone's kind of like following what's the latest update, because you get rolling scores now, live updates. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
That's because you're so consumed by it. It's something that we cannot switch ourselves off from. It consumes us to such an extent that irrespective of where we are or whatever we're doing, our mind is only focused in one direction, because we have become so consumed by the sport itself or by our so-called commitment and affiliation to the team and to the game that's happening. So we cannot miss out on a second of it. If it's 90 minutes, we need to be consumed for that entire 90 minutes plus the extra time, etc. There was the clip that was circulated a few weeks back, or in the midst of the World Cup itself, of a person viewing the match, and here was was, I don't know, some family member in the home, I don't know whether it was the wife or something, that had another remote and was, playing fools of switching it off each time. And this guy thought that his TV is tripping, and he goes each time and he taps it and he tries something and he comes back on, and eventually he becomes so enraged at just being disturbed from the sport itself that he ends up smashing everything around him, including the TV set itself. Now, that is not something that is unfortunate, that is far-fetched. It's a harsh reality that we're facing. Nobody's allowed to talk, nobody's allowed to breathe, nobody's allowed to do anything. Why? I'm watching my sport. I must not be disturbed in any way. Definitely is making us very anti-social, and that's not how we're supposed to be. Nothing supposed to consume us to that extent that we become totally oblivious of those around us. And especially when it comes to us being in company, we need to fulfill the rights of those that are there. Again, come back to the beautiful sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It has taken into cognizance to such an extent the feelings and the sentiments of people around you that we learn from the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. If 3 people are together in one place, 2 should not speak secretly or softly so that the third cannot hear, because you're not allowed to make that person feel uncomfortable. Everybody's supposed to be accommodated. Their feelings supposed to be taken into account and it's supposed to be taken care of. Now that's with regards to the sunnah. Here you bring in something that's not entirely, it doesn't really find a strong place or footing in our deen, and then you're making it consume you to such an extent that you're impeding on the rights of others. That is not something that is ideal.
Now, Moulana, this aspect of I don't know, call it a sense of belonging, a sense of loyalty, where, gunners or red devils, I'm not, maybe a little bit out of touch with these terminologies, but, people become so proud and so loyal to that particular brand. What's your take on that?
Obsession, or that comes down to the root of being obsessed with something. That is the thing. It's obsession, and it basically it's doing something for us that's making us feel good and making us feel confident and feel proud that this is my team and this is who we are. And again, it's also about the marketing. If we look at the vigorous marketing in the sporting world, that also is something that indoctrinates our minds to that level where we become so obsessed and we literally believe that we are it, and we're the untouchables, and there's nobody that can beat us.
Spend an arm and a leg to get the t-shirt.
To do the t-shirt, and with what sense of honor it's worn, etc. It comes down to obsession, which also is not the ideal.
And then again, you lose your whole perspective, because then you come with that name of someone who doesn't even acknowledge the existence of Allah, and you come with it into the masjid on your back, and you're wearing it so proud, and you're going into sajda. And that just highlights the point that you're making. You become so obsessed, you don't even realize what you're doing thereafter.
But then nowadays they'll say, no, we got more salah, Moulana.
Hero worship, it kind of flows from there. That I can remember, and Hansi Kronia. I remember I was listening to a radio program the day after the scandal broke, and I was driving somewhere and I was tuning to the radio, and there were people phoning in and crying. And the one lady said, "What do I tell my child?" Because Hansi Kronia was like this, mini god, if you want to use that particular phrase. It's the hero worship had gone to such an extent that people believed that this guy could do nothing wrong. This guy was it. And here all of a sudden he's publicly admitting now that I was cheating and I was involved in all of these, wrongful activities. And it just came crumbling down for so many people.
Crashing down, or should I say exploding, Moulana. You see, the problem when it comes to hero worship, and again, this is a big problem in the world itself. What defines a hero? Let's go back to basics. If there's anybody out there that you would wish to emulate, if there's anybody out there that you want to give your heart and soul to, this is the person that's my model, the one that I look up to. What defines that individual? This aspect of hero worship, in fact, it's like it's a whole independent topic on its own. It's a rather deep, intense topic. Again, when we look at the write-ups that have been written on this topic itself, it's something that goes into great detail. In fact, now that you mentioned an example as we introduce this part of the topic itself, sympathy should be given to the one who suddenly become the hero, because that man adopted a sport. He felt he had an expertise in this in this field, whatever the sport might be, and he took it up as a professional career, and he started playing it for whatever reason, for his passion or for the money that was involved or for the team that he's playing, whatever it was. He did it as an individual. He never thought beyond that. Suddenly he became the hero of 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, how many followers throughout the globe. What mental pressure is put on that individual that it's not something that he asked for. And then here he falters as a human being. We all, as human beings, have faults. We will fall down at some point or the other. None of us are perfect. So when he falls from the top, he fell as an individual. But here he got the backlash of 1 million people that are now swearing him, cursing him, and want to take him to task. But you should feel sympathy for him as well. Hero worship, especially as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have the best role models that the world could ever ask for. And those role models are who? On what base would you take an individual and put him to that level? There should be good qualities, there should be amazing abilities that's supposed to be within that individual for anybody to be looking up to. And we have perfect role models in the galaxy of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have the most perfect of individuals, the most perfect human being, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as our beloved Prophet and as our role model and the hero that we're supposed to be looking up to. But today we found so many others, and as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the condition that we find ourselves in at present is quite disturbing. In fact, it's something to cry over, that we have youngsters that want to emulate and that have intense, when I say intense, love and hero worship of people that are so far from the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something to cry over, and it consumes us to such an extent. And we're not only talking about our youngsters, Moulana, as in the young boys of the Ummah, the teenagers of the Ummah. Unfortunately, as I told you in the beginning, this is a weakness that has even crept into the sisters of the Ummah. Instead of the blessed wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the female companions being the role models of the young daughters of the Ummah, they also looking up to individuals whose social life, whose whole outlook and existence is nothing but to disobey Allah and is full of immorality and evil. We have made them our heroes. It's very disturbing. People have given their hearts to such an intense level that that person is it to me. If something happens to that person, it's like it happened to me. If they fall from grace, I can't take it. And when we look at it at the tragic end of so many people that were the supposed heroes of the world, how many of them have committed suicide? How many have went down the worst parts of life and degraded themselves to such great levels? And who's left heartbroken? The believer in Allah. That's really sad.
Picking up from what you mentioned earlier on about Mo Salah in relation to that Jersey example, you would get youngsters who would say, okay, but see, today, from what I read, I think the French team that won the World Cup, there was a number of Muslims in the team. You've got Salah, you've got Hashim Amla, you've got those kind of Muslim sportsmen or sports people. But I think, Moulana, that clip of yours that went viral, I don't know, a couple of months ago, was it last year already, where I think you made a very vital point that, of course, as Muslims, we get happier if a Muslim excels in any field. Definitely. And especially if that Muslim radiates the right kind of values. In the case of Hashim Amla, very proud of his deen, he shows great akhlaq and character. But if you're really making that person your hero, it's not about wearing a jersey, which you're doing for sporting purposes more than anything else, even though it has the name of a Muslim behind its back and coming with it into the pure environment of the masjid. Emulate them in all the other aspects also. Mo Salah and his dedication to Salah, and Hashim Amla and his dedication to so many of the other pivotal aspects of deen. Don't only now say, he's a Muslim, so it's fine, he's my hero, but I only follow him in as far as his cricketing is concerned. Follow him in terms of, like you mentioned in the clip, his dedication to the Quran. 100%.
Look at the good and take the whole picture. Don't selectively take only what is suiting us.
All right, time for a break now. When we come back, inshallah, we continue the discussion on sport addiction. Okay, welcome back. So we move into the last segment of the program, and we're talking about sport addiction. We've covered quite a bit of ground. We've spoken about what makes you a fanatic, about overindulgence, the harms, the effects on family life, obsession, hero worship. The other important aspect, Moulana, especially when it comes to spectator sport, although to some extent even in sporting activities in certain communities, this would apply, is desensitization when it comes to Islamic principles, dress code, advertising of liquor, of promiscuity, of immorality. Sometimes people could argue, yeah, but we know all of that is haram. We're not focused on that. We're focusing on the football. But can you really consider yourself immune to that whole environment and climate within which all of this takes place?
No, definitely not. We cannot say that we're immune to it. And this is also a big challenge when it comes to this addiction of sports, and especially spectator sport. That which we expose ourselves to, good and bad, all has an effect upon us as individuals. The good that we expose ourselves to definitely has a good effect on ourselves, on our character, and the conditioning of our minds. You see, sometimes we fail to realize and we underestimate the power of indoctrination. Have we ever asked ourselves, why is advertising such a powerful tool in the world with regards to any product or anything? It's because the more you see something, automatically, subconsciously, it's having an effect on your mind. You know, I read up an article some time ago with regards to advertisements that play out sometimes on the television. So it'll be a 10-second advertisement, but the last 3 seconds is actually the highlight of what they wanted to tell you from the beginning. They exposed you to 12 seconds, but the whole focus was on 3 seconds. Now you think about 3 seconds, I mean, that's like blinking my eye 3 times. What can 3 seconds do to me as an individual? But these guys have mastered the art and the technique of making sure that that which they want to enter your subconscious mind, which you never really realize right now, but at some point or the other it's going to come up. They've mastered that art and that technique. So as individuals, when we're exposing ourselves to something which is forbidden and something which is frowned upon in our deen, the more it flashes before our eyes, the more we become, what's the word I'm looking for, the more we exposed to it, it has an effect on us spiritually. Now, when you're talking about spectator sport, you've been present for that match itself, the blasting music that's happening all around you. You can say, but I don't listen to music. But are you going to cover your ears? That indoctrination is going through your mind. It's running through your veins. Obviously, the immorality that revolves around sport in general, etc. I mean, you take, for example, let's look at real examples. Cricket, for example. It was a game that you're supposed to have a bowler, batsman, your fielders, etc., and your spectators and watching it. How that has evolved into now almost like a nightclub sort of scenario with blasting music after every 4 is it, after every wicket that takes place. Then you see how it evolved further. You take T20, for example, 20 over cricket, and you take the IPL or whatever example you want to cite. Then you bring in the woman in it, and it's all the immorality that revolves around it. But it was sport. Where did it lead to? Now, a person who's there cannot say that I'm sitting here, but I'm totally immune to all the evil that's happening all around me. And also among the many harms that come about with regards to the addiction to sports is the wastage of time. That is a very serious issue. That is not a small thing. Allah has taken an oath in the Quran with regards to time, that man is at a loss except those that believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those that do good, those that enjoin that which is correct and stand for haqq, and those that have patience in this world. Time is our greatest capital. How much of time gets wasted in sports itself? We are oblivious of salah sometimes, as you mentioned earlier. Time in our life that goes, we can never ever get back. We're supposed to be using this life correctly in a manner which is pleasing to Allah to earn us eternal existence in the Jannah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for the believers. We're wasting the time on sport. You can't be saying I'm engaged in dhikr. I don't know, some people, the spiritual level, the addiction to sport takes them to such a spiritual level, they're making dua for the team. They're asking Allah, Allah, make my team win. We can't lose, we've lost enough. I don't know, maybe they can say they're getting spiritual upliftment in that, but you're not immune, you cannot say that you are not affected by the harms or the immorality or whatever is forbidden that is constantly portrayed in the different sports that are found in the world.
I suppose the proof of the power of indoctrination and subliminal messaging when it comes to sport is in the fact that companies spend millions of dollars in advertising.
Billions.
Just to put a tick here somewhere, and a person could argue, well, I'm not focused on what logo there is on the person's t-shirt, I'm focused on the game. But if you were not, and if there wasn't a positive impact for the advertisers, they wouldn't be spending, as you say, billions of dollars on that. The fact that people are actually then responding to that and then purchasing tickets or purchasing the gear or whatever, it shows that the power of indoctrination is definitely intertwined when it comes to sport, and that subliminal messaging is definitely having an effect. Otherwise, they wouldn't be spending the money.
It works like magic, Moulana. I know of companies that have sponsored certain sports, etc., and just the flash of your company logo or your product for that few seconds, people have seen a lot of benefit. It's like worth every cent. It's like the best investment they can make. It's a very serious thing. It's a real thing. We might not acknowledge it, but it's real to the world.
And we see it in the actions of our youngsters. They will mimic everything. I must wear the same cap, the same color cap. I must wear the same shoes. the same color shoes. It must be that particular brand.
CR7. The
Yeah.
hairstyle, everything. You want to mimic everything.
Well, we're fast running out of time. So we've spoken about the harms and as far as the environment that surrounds spectator sport. We've spoken about the waste of time. What about the wastage of money? Apart from what we've already touched on, in terms of buying all of these T-shirts and that kind of thing that comes at exorbitant prices, and you can't take your lady nowadays to Chinatown and say, I don't want that version of it. I want the proper version. But what if somebody tells you and comes up to you and says, you know what, Allah has given me the money, Allah has given me the means, I want to fly to Europe to watch the Champions League finals. Is that considered wastage of money or not?
I think an important message to all our viewers out there and to the Ummah at large is the following, because I think we're oblivious of a very important narration of the Prophet ﷺ, but I think at the same time we're aware of the first part of that narration. Some people are aware of the first part, but I think many are oblivious of the second part of the narration. And that is, we all aware that when we stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah, we will be questioned with regards to our wealth. How did we earn it? So there's many people out there that might be able to answer the same question quite efficiently, that, oh Allah, I worked hard in a manner which was pleasing to you, and through halal means and permissible means, I earned a lot of wealth through your blessings. You blessed me with a lot of wealth. So you answered the first part of the question. But there's another question that is to follow immediately thereafter. And how did you spend that wealth? This is a narration of the Prophet ﷺ that I had discussed at great length when speaking on the topic of extravagance with regards to functions and weddings, etc. So I gave the example when I spoke on that topic on the Jummah platform, that would a person be bold enough to give the honest answer of saying, oh Allah, I spent 400,000 rand on flowers for my daughter's wedding. You have to account for every single cent. So the same thing we can bring into this aspect of wastage of money when it comes to sports, whether it be the products that we purchase in because of our dedication and our obsession with the team that we are following, or whether it comes to us traveling abroad to watch the sport. Again, Islam has drawn the balance of incorporating leisure, entertainment, and having some sort of relaxation. But to what extent are you going to take it? You're spending so much of money on a passion and an obsession. Is it bringing you spiritual benefit? Is it pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do you realize that you're accountable for every single cent that you spend and that you part with? Our wealth, together with our lives, together with our bodies, is all an amana and a trust given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the manner in which we utilize it defines whether we have fulfilled the trust of that amana or we have betrayed the trust. And then we will be answerable for it. May Allah guide us and grant us the realization.
Moulana, we've covered quite a bit of ground, and mashallah, you've enlightened us in a very eloquent way, but we're out of time. How do we surmise? There may be still people sitting there and watching this program and saying this. What are you saying? We mustn't watch any sport. We mustn't take part in any sport. What are we saying? What have we said? Can you just wrap it up for us and put it all into context?
I think to wrap it up and to give our listeners something to go, our viewers to go home with something or to understand something, is that let us go back to the drawing board. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-kayyisu man dana nafsa." The intelligent person is the one that is controlled and takes stock of himself. So if each person, you have your obsession with cricket, you have your obsession with soccer, whatever it is, you love your golf, you love your sport, you love it. This is not right. That's fine. We acknowledge it. To what extent do you love it? That's all. All we're saying is, let us try and attempt to draw a balance in our lives. And I think it will be also ideal, Moulana, before we end this program, is to also speak about those types of activities and sport that is mentioned in the Sunnah. So if you really want to get involved in something, get involved in something that has a base also in our deen. Archery has been mentioned by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the shooting of an arrow, and technically in the modern world that we live in, even the firing of a gun or firearm will also fall under that, because you're shooting towards a target in that manner. So archery, horse riding is something that the Prophet ﷺ has made mention of. Swimming is something that the Prophet ﷺ has made mention of. So do that with the noble intention that this forms part of the Sunnah. My Prophet ﷺ has spoken about this, so I want to do it. Be a wonderful swimmer, be a good horse rider, be a good archer, shoot arrows. And you know, when you indulge yourself in that, you will see what genuine skill is required for that. We think kicking a ball is something that requires a lot of skill, but although I must be honest, sometimes the way that ball curves, you wonder like what's in the person's foot. How did they manage to do that? So it's about drawing the balance. Don't let anything overconsume you to the extent that you become oblivious of your duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your duties to the people around you, and your responsibilities of life. As long as you have that balance, then you're on a good footing.
that all those student sports will bring you the same physical as well as emotional and psychological benefits. In the end, it's all about priorities. Moulana, Jazakumullah so much for your time and for the very informed perspective that you've given us this evening.
Always a pleasure being on your show, Moulana.
Look forward to the next time, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Right, so that's it. Sports addiction. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك